Hi everybody, this is Lindsay from windingroadcrochet.com, and today I am so excited to be showing you how to crochet this cape coat. It is an adorable coat for any princess in your life, and the best part is it has sizes toddler all the way through girl 16. So if you like to crochet, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit that like button, and check out my blog where I have several other free crochet patterns, as well as the written pattern for this video. Today we're going to be making the toddler size, but the instructions is pretty much the same for all the different sizes. And for the first one, I used one full skein of Red Heart with Love, but for this next one I'm making today, I'm going to be using Red Heart Baby Hugs, and it takes me a little bit more than one skein. You're also going to need to use one of these button closures, or you can have a button with a chain loop. I'm using a size H hook, but because this is size dependent, you do want to make sure you check the gauge, and the gauge information is on the written pattern. But besides our hook and our yarn and our button closure, you will just need a needle and a set of scissors and a little bit of embroidery floss for sewing on your button closure. And then also you want to have just a little bit of an accent color if you decide to use little extra details at the bottom, and I'll show you how to make these little tulips. Now you can find the complete pattern on my website for this pattern, or you can purchase an ad-free PDF pattern on Etsy, and I will put links for both of those in the description box below. So before we get started, I just want to explain how this is put together. We need to make first 3 separate panels, and then we are going to actually crochet those 3 panels together. So this is worked completely flat, and then later we will seam up the shoulders. So we're going to go ahead and get started making that center panel. To do this, you're going to make a slip knot, put it on your hook, and then we are just going to chain 32 for the toddler size. This is actually an easy project working with mostly double crochet. So once your chain is done, in the 3rd chain from the hook, we are going to work 2 double crochet. So this is our first double crochet, and then we're going to work a 2nd double crochet into the very same chain. Now you're going to double crochet into the next 28 chains, or simply until you reach the very last stitch. Alright, so now when we reach the very last stitch, in that very last stitch we're going to work another 2 double crochet. So there's an increase in the first stitch and an increase in the last stitch. And that completes our first row. Moving on to row 2, we are going to chain 2, and for this project and most of my projects, I do not count this chain 2 as a stitch, so completely ignore the turning chain, and we're going to work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch. Now we are going to work a double crochet into the next 30 stitches, or basically into every stitch until you reach the very last stitch. I think this cape would be super cute over a Princess Halloween costume. If you have a favorite princess that you are going to make this kind of match, let me know in the comments below. So once we reach our very last stitch, once again we are going to work 2 double crochet into that very last stitch. What we're doing with these increases is simply creating that kind of cap sleeve look at the edge of the cape. So that completes row 2. And now for row 3, we're just going to chain 2 again, turn our work, and we're going to double crochet twice into that very first stitch. And then you're going to double crochet into the next 32 stitches, which is every stitch except for the very last stitch. Alright, so we've again made it to our very last stitch, and you're probably not going to be surprised. We are going to work 2 double crochet into this very last stitch. And there we go, end of row 3, making the nice neat cap sleeve. Now if you're making a larger size, you're going to do more rows like this where you're going to be increasing on both ends, and you can follow the pattern to get the exact number of rows you're going to do this. But for the toddler size, we are done making our cap sleeve. So now we're just going to double crochet back and forth a few times. So to do that, you're going to chain 2, starting row 4, and you're going to double crochet 1 double crochet into every stitch across. And when you're done with the row, you should have a total of 36 stitches. And you are going to repeat this row until you have a total of 14 rows. So row 4 through 14, you're going to just double crochet in every stitch across. So here I am at the end of row 14 for our center panel. And once I complete my very last stitch, I will just fasten this off, pull the yarn through our last loop, and now we're ready to make our side panels. So with the center panel done, we're ready to start our side panel, and we are going to make 2 of these side panels. And all you're going to do is put another slip knot on your hook, and you are going to chain 17. And basically this panel we're making is going to be like half of a back panel, and you'll see that in a minute. So the first thing you're going to do when we start row 1 is you're going to double crochet into the 3rd chain from the hook and every chain across until you reach the very last stitch. So that would be a total of 14 double crochet. So when you reach the very last stitch, all you're going to do is work 2 double crochet into the last stitch. Now you'll notice we only increased on one side of this panel because it is only half of the front panel. So then moving on to row 2, we are going to chain 2, and then this side is the side that we're increasing, so we're going to work 2 double crochet into the very first stitch, 1 and 2, and then we'll simply work 1 double crochet into every stitch until we reach the very end. Alright, so we made it to the very end of this row, and so row 2 is completed. And now we are on the straight side, so we will start by chaining 2 for row 3, and then we'll work a double crochet into each stitch until you reach the very last stitch. If you're working a different size, really the only thing that changes in this part of the pattern is how many chains you start with. You're still going to be increasing on one side or increasing on both sides for the center panel. And again, how many rows you increase may change, but you can get all those details in the written pattern. All the other instructions are pretty much the same. So here we've reached the last stitch of row 3, and we're going to work 2 double crochet into that very last stitch. And there you go. Now, just like our center panel, as we do rows 4 through 14, all we are going to do is chain 2, turn, and work 1 double crochet into every stitch across, and you're just going to repeat that until you have a total of 14 rows. And then just like our other center panel, when you complete 14 rows, you're just going to fasten off, and then you will need to make a second side panel for the other side of the front of the cape. So here we have our first completed panel, and you can see where we have the rounded edges. You're going to want to face those rounded edges towards you, and then take your side panels and face them with the rounded edges both towards you and also faced towards the rounded edges of the center panel. So just lay your pieces out on both sides so all of the rounded edges are close to each other. Now taking your first side panel, and on the side that has that straight edge, we're going to insert our hook into the very first stitch in the corner, yarn over, and pull up a loop. Alright, from here we're going to chain 2 to be our turning chain. And then because we don't count that as a stitch, we're going to work another double crochet right into the same stitch that we just slip stitched to. So work our double crochet, and then what you're going to do is you're just going to work one double crochet into every stitch across the end of this side panel. And then when you reach the very end of this side panel, working our double crochet into the very last stitch, we are going to pick up our center panel, and then we're going to work our next double crochet into the first stitch on the corner of the center panel. And this is what we technically would call a standing double crochet. So we're joining with that double crochet. And once again, we're going to work one double crochet in each stitch along the bottom of this center panel. And then I technically call this row 1 of our skirt piece of our cape. Now that we finished our center panel, we are going to work a double crochet into the first inner corner of the next side panel. This is partially why you want to lay out all your panels to make sure they're in order before you start this row. And then once again, just double crochet in each stitch all the way across this panel to join these 2 rows. So once you reach the very end of the last panel, you will end up with 3 panels that are connected by a row of double crochets. So now moving forward, we are going to create the bottom part of the skirt. You're going to chain 2 and turn your work. And we are going to make the bottom of the skirt flare out really neatly so that it can go around a nice fluffy skirt on a dress. To do this, we are going to double crochet into the first 3 stitches. And then we are going to work a repeat of increases along this row and several other rows on the way through the base of this skirt. Now this repeat is going to be to double crochet 10 and then increase or work 2 double crochet into the same stitch. Now if you're not really familiar with reading crochet patterns, anytime you see something inside a parentheses or inside, a lot of times I will use an asterisk on both sides, and then it will either say repeat a total of so many times, or it'll have like the X6 like I have written up here. That just means you are going to take what's inside those parentheses or inside that asterisk and you're going to repeat it a number of times. We write it this way so that we don't have a huge long pattern. It's a nice short way of writing this. So here I've worked 10 double crochet, and then now in this next stitch I am going to work 2 double crochet into the same stitch. So I finished my first repeat, and now I'm just going to repeat the exact same thing again and continue repeating it 5 more times until I reach the end of this row. And what this is doing is this is spreading out my increases so that they're not clumped together and that everything is going to fan out evenly along the bottom of the cape. So once I repeat the 10 double crochet and the increase a total of 6 times, I'll get back and show you how to finish up this row. So here I'm working my very last increase. So I've repeated the repeat section a total of 6 times, and now I'm just going to work 3 more double crochet at the very end of this row. And the reason for the 3 at the beginning and the end is that keeps our seam right down the center of the cape body perfectly straight. So that completes the second row of the base of the cape. Moving on to the third row of the base of the cape, we're just going to chain 2, and this is a nice easy row. You're just going to double crochet in every stitch all the way across. And one thing you'll know, and I'm trying to kind of point out as I do this, is what we're actually creating is another repeat, but we're creating a row repeat. So the row we just did would be the first row in this row repeat. This is the second row in the row repeat, which I'll explain a little bit better in just a few minutes. And there's going to be 2 more rows. So here we've reached the end of the row. So that was our easy row all the way across. Now to start the next row, we're just going to chain 2, turn our work. This is the third row in our 4-row repeat. We are going to start again by double crocheting into the first 3 stitches. Now for this repeat, we are going to start by increasing in the next stitch, so 2 double crochet into the next stitch, 1 and 2, and then we're going to double crochet into the next 11 stitches, and we will repeat that increase and then double crochet into 11 stitches. We'll repeat that a total of 6 times. So we've repeated that repeat 6 times, and now we're just going to double crochet into the very last 3 stitches. 1, 2, and 3. All right, and then we are going to chain 2 again, working on the 4th row of our repeat, and this is a really easy row. Again, we're just going to double crochet into every stitch across. So we're going to be alternating a row of just double crocheting across and a row of increasing 6 that are spread out evenly along our cape using the repeats. So now we've reached the end of this simple row, and then all we're going to do is keep alternating a solid row double crochet with a row where we are increasing by 6 with them spreading out across the cape until we have a total of 23 rows. So here's just an example of what the pattern's going to look like moving forward. And if you're not familiar with patterns, I just wanted to point out a few things to make this a little easier to follow. As I just showed you, we're going to be alternating increase rows with rows where we stay exactly the same, and we just double crochet in each stitch across. There are 2 things I want to point out about the increase rows. The first thing is that your increase are going to flip. So say on row 6 you're going to work your 12 double crochet and then you're going to increase, and then when you get to your next increase row, which is row 8, you're going to actually increase first and then you're going to work your double crochet. And the reason we're doing this is so that everything stays nice and even as we increase along the base of the cape. The second thing to point out on the increase rows is that every time you work an increase row, you're going to work 1 more double crochet in between your increase. So for row 6 we're working 12 double crochet, row 8 it's going to be 13 double crochet, and row 10 it's 14 double crochet in between your increases. So the technique is completely the same, but the number goes up by 1. Of course, if you go over to the blog, you'll see the whole written pattern that will lay this out for you a little bit easier. And then just one more tip I want to give you. Since we end up counting so many double crochet in between our increases, a really fun trick is to go ahead and at the beginning of your row, count out your stitches and mark your increase rows. So I'm just counting out how many stitches I am going to double crochet in. I find my increase stitch, and then I'm just going to mark that with a stitch marker. And the really reason for doing this is otherwise you are going to be counting the entire time you're working on this cape, and if you do it this way, you're just going to spend a quick minute counting out, marking your increases, and then while you're crocheting, if someone is talking to you, you're not going to get upset if you lose count or anything like that. So it just makes it a much more pleasant experience. Plus it gives you a reason to buy cute little stitch markers for this kind of project. So here I'm just finishing up my 23rd row of the base of the cape, and as you can see I went ahead and worked my last 6 rows in a different color. I didn't do this for my first cape, but I decided to do it for this one because I wanted to give it a little bit of a Christmas-like theme to this cape. So now if you want, your inside edge right here is not as clean looking as I'd like it to be. So this is completely optional, but one thing you can do is single crochet down the edge of these double crochets. So to do that you would chain 1, and then you would simply work 2 single crochet into the side of each double crochet. So 1 single crochet, and then working around the double crochet, a 2nd single crochet. And then I just keep doing that down the side of every row. And this is just going to give you a nice clean finished edge. Once you make it to the very top of the cape, you will just fasten off your yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail because we're going to use that tail to kind of weave in a gap, to fill a gap in a little bit. So just pull that tail through your very last loop. So now I'm just going to grab my yarn end and I'm going to go and do the exact same thing for the other side of the cape, but so that my stitches are facing the same way, I am going to start at the top of the cape on this side and work my way down. So just yarn over and pull up a loop, chain 1, and begin single crocheting down the side of this side of the cape. And again, this is completely optional. So I'm just finishing up this side of the cape. I will fasten off my yarn, and we'll weave in those ends later, and you can see how we have a nice clean edge. So from here you just want to line up the top of your cape so it looks like it's finished project, and we are going to be crocheting along the top of our pieces of our side panel and center panel, but we're not going to crochet all the way to the edge. We're just going to crochet a little bit in the center, and then we're going to jump and crochet a little bit of the back panel. So let's go ahead and do this. So just go ahead and take your hook and going on the center side of our front panel, we're just going to grab our yarn and pull up a loop. And then using the working yarn, the longest piece of yarn, you're just going to chain 2. Now working into the exact same stitch, we are going to work a double crochet into the first stitch and into the next 6 stitches. So it's going to be a total of 7 double crochet onto this front panel. And what we're doing is we're working into the opposite side of the starting chain that we made at the very beginning of this project. So now that I've completed my first 7 double crochet, I'm going to skip the rest of this panel, and we're going to go ahead and flip over our cape. Now, starting from the corner of this next panel, we're going to count over 7 chain. Now, don't count the actual stitches. You want to count those top chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to skip these 7, and then very carefully you're just going to work your next double crochet into that next chain. So that's our first double crochet on the back panel, and then we're going to work 15 more double crochet on the back panel, so there'll be a total of 16 double crochet on the back panel. And then it's very important that this should be centered on the back panel. So if you're finding that the counts aren't working out perfectly for you, just make sure that your 16 double crochet are centered on that back panel. So now we're finishing that 16th double crochet. Again, we're just going to skip the rest of our stitches on the back panel. It should be another 7 stitches. It should be the same on both sides, but again, it's not super important that you count it as long as you're centered on the back. Now moving on to the next front panel, we are going to skip the next 8 chain. So starting from that rounded corner, you will count over 8. And then the next stitch after those 8, we're going to work another double crochet. And don't worry about this not being kind of tight in this corner. We can sew when we sew the side seams up, we can go ahead and fix that big gap in between the white stitches. So then on this front panel, you will have a total of 7 double crochet. So you'll have that first double crochet and then double crochet in the next 6 stitches, which should take you right to that corner. All right, so that is our first row of our collar. So now we turned and we're ready to work row 2 of the collar, and we are going to start row 2 by double crocheting 3 together. So chain 2, and we're going to double crochet these 3 stitches together, and it's actually really easy. Just yarn over and insert your hook into the first stitch, pull up a loop. You will have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through the first 2 of the loops. We're basically making half of a double crochet. So yarn over again and repeat this. Pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. We now have 3 loops on our hook. Yarn over once more, go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops on the hook. We now have 4 loops on the hook. Now here is where we will yarn over and pull it through all the loops on the hook to double crochet 3 stitches together. Now all we have to do is double crochet in each stitch across until we reach the last 3 stitches. So I just have to work my last double crochet, and then we'll double crochet 3 together. So just yarn over, pull a loop up from the first stitch, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over again, insert into the next stitch and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Yarn over once more, insert your hook in the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And then we'll yarn over and pull through all the loops on the hook. And that just kind of angles and curves the edge of our collar, making it look kind of like one of those oriental collars. So now we're just going to clip our thread and pull it through the last loop on the hook. We can use this yarn tail, so when we weave in our ends we can connect these two so we don't have a gap here. But now we're ready to weave in our ends, and then we're going to sew our shoulders together. So when you lay your cape out, we are going to simply use a whip stitch to sew across the top of our shoulders and then down along the curved edge of our cape. That's going to be down along the side of the first 3 rows of our cape. So we're just sewing up the curve into the shoulder right up to where that collar is. And then you can sew the same area on the other side of the cape. And then I just like to use a simple whip stitch to do this. Once you reach the end, you can just tie a knot and then weave in your yarn. Now on my first cape, you might have seen that I have these cute little tulip designs on the bottom of the cape, so I'm going to show you how to make those right now. All you got to do is make a slip knot and insert your hook. We are going to chain 7, And then going into the third chain from the hook, we are going to work a single crochet. Now we're going to work a half double crochet into the next 2 chain. So 1 half double crochet, 2 half double crochet, and then we're going to work 1 more single crochet in the next chain and a slip stitch into the very last chain. And remember this chain here because we're going to slip stitch to this 2 more times. So now that makes 1 petal. We're going to make another one by chaining 6. And then we're just going to repeat the process. We're going to single crochet into the third chain from the hook, work a half double crochet into the next 2 stitches, work a single crochet into the next chain, and then slip stitch to the exact same chain that you slip stitched before. And then we'll just do this once more. So chain 6, single crochet into the third chain from the hook, half double crochet in the next chain, half double crochet in the next chain, single crochet into the last chain, and then slip stitch to that very same chain that we slip stitched the last few times. Now we're just going to clip our yarn, leaving a nice long tail so that you can sew this onto the cape. Now for the toddler cape, I did use 12 of these. And there you have it. There's a cute little tulip. So make a few more, and then you can either sew them to the bottom of the dress, or I actually hot glued them, but I tend to take that shortcut a few times. So then I just take my cape and I'm going to put this little tulip right in the center of this white stripe. And then my rule of thumb is to always either glue or sew that center leaf on first so that I know everything is positioned the way I want it, and then I'll go back and I will sew the 2 side leaves in place. So I truly hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below if you're happy with the video tutorials, and that tells me if I need to keep making more of them. Thank you so much for watching.